The MCU has some of the most beloved characters in all of pop culture, but let's not pretend they didn't do some of our favorite comic characters dirty. Yes, on the whole, the MCU is this amazing, wonderful, joyous film experience that's a whole lot of fun, but I think I can safely say the franchise has ruined some great characters with bad storylines and poor development. But hey, on the flip side, they deserve credit for fixing problematic characters as well. Join me today as I discuss some of the characters the MCU has ruined, as well as some of the biggest ones it fixed. Sort of a mixed bag today, but it's going to be a good time. Let's get started right now.
It's not real, pet. It's just acting.
Okay, to show that I'm not just a heartless hater, I want to start with the Mandarin because it's both a character that the MCU ruined, but then was able to fix by doing the radical thing of adapting the comic character in a semi-faithful way-ish. But let's talk about the ruin part first. Look, we are all too familiar with the whole Mandarin fake-out in Iron Man 3, and I think if you poll 100 people, 50 of them will say they loved the twist, 50 of them will say it was a grave disservice. I can honestly see both sides here, and even though I actually really like Iron Man 3 more than most, I do agree that the way the twist was handled, it could have been better. The big problem with the whole Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3 is that it felt like a psych, it's all a punchline, rather than a legitimate story progression. Like, the Mandarin was Tony's big villain. It was the Joker to his Batman. It was something that was teased and set up in the very first Iron Man. So for all that to be turned into a joke felt really insulting. And add the fact that the Marvel one-shot All Hail the King was released much later and basically said, oh no, don't worry, the real Mandarin is out there, felt more like a course correction rather than something the franchise had specifically plotted out. So yeah, they ruined the Mandarin character when they really shouldn't have. Like, they wanted to have a villain in Guy Pearce who was humiliated by Tony Stark back in his jerk days, only to come at him now that he's a hero. But here's the thing, that storyline would also work with the actual Mandarin. It would have brought Tony's arc full circle, as the Mandarin would have been semi-responsible for turning Tony Stark into Iron Man, and now they face off with each other. But alas, maybe it was actually for the best, because by ruining the Mandarin here, it paved the way for the story arc in Shang-Chi, which gave us a top 5 MCU villain, at least in my eyes. So now here's the ultimate time travel question. Would you go back in time to make the Mandarin the actual villain of Iron Man 3, knowing it will make Shang-Chi different, or would you keep things as they are now? Tough choice. Okay, the Hulk is another ruined character in the MCU, and I hate to say that because technically the MCU actually fixed his character first. After the Incredible Hulk with Ed Norton didn't quite fit with the vibe the MCU was starting to build, Mark Ruffalo stepped up and delivered a Bruce Banner that fit right in with Tony Stark and the rest of the Avengers. But the handling of Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has been wildly inconsistent for the sake of cool moments. Like, really, it starts back in that first Avengers movie where Bruce reveals he's always angry and can turn to the Hulk in a moment's notice. Yes, it's the coolest part of that whole movie, but what? How does that make sense? Then the relationship between Hulk and Bruce seems like it's always on the fringes, with the events of Age of Ultron sending him off-world, to the Hulk taking over for years without Bruce Banner being able to do anything in Thor Ragnarok, to the whole issues that they said they needed to work out in Infinity War, with a quick note of how did Banner deliver the message that Thanos was coming after turning back into Bruce at the start of Infinity War, when it was established that Banner has no memory of what the Hulk does, and then basically their whole issue being resolved off-screen, resulting in Professor Hulk that sidestepped the issue that Banner completely erased the Hulk personality completely. Man, that's just a lot, right? The Hulk has constantly been overlooked to service other heroes, and it seems like the MCU has one final chance to do the character justice in the She-Hulk TV show, so fingers crossed. If you ask anyone the weakest MCU movie, they'll most likely say Iron Man 2. And besides the fact that Tony Stark is barely in his Iron Man armor in a movie called Iron Man 2, a lot of the blame falls on the villain. Whiplash was a mess, and the tale behind this is actually pretty fascinating. So apparently there's a ton of extra footage and scenes that Mickey Rourke shot for the part that were drastically cut down, reducing Ivan Vanko to a mumbling, almost unintelligible mess who mainly just wants his bird.
Hey.
Yes.
I want my bird.
I know we all hopped on the train of releasing the Snyder Cut, but come on, don't you kind of want to see them release the Whiplash cut? Oh, no? Okay, fine. But yeah, Whiplash just did not bring the charisma or the menace to be an adequate foil for Tony Stark. It was like Whiplash and Justin Hammer were both second-tier bad guys fighting to be the main bad guy, and it didn't work. Compare that to the Whiplash in the comics, and it's even more frustrating. Quicksilver shot himself in the foot before getting a chance to truly race. And let me just say, on all levels, I get why he was written off so quickly.
You didn't see that coming?
Besides the fact that having a speedster on the team immediately makes it so that the Avengers should never lose a fight, since speedsters are normally so overpowered that writers have to find a way to either nerf them or make them not use the full extent of their powers, Pietro's demise was the perfect catalyst to get Wanda over to the Avengers and solidify her place on the team. Plus, Age of Ultron was a Joss Whedon movie. Of course, not everyone would make it out alive, but I can't help but notice the timing of things, where the Quicksilver in the Fox universe absolutely crushed it and won everyone over, where it looked like the MCU went, yeah, can't compete with that, let's put some bullets in our Quicksilver. Again, I know that wasn't the case, but doesn't it feel like it? And the fact that they had a chance to bring back Quicksilver in WandaVision and even cast Evan Peters in the role seemed like they were doing something big with Quicksilver's character, only for all that to mean absolutely nothing so the show could say his name was Ralph Boner. Come on, that's just super disappointing.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
Some people might be fans, but I wasn't thrilled with the reveal that Sharon Carter had officially broken bad in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and was now a crime boss that went by the Power Broker. Like, honestly, I think you could have written her out of that show and everything would be relatively the same. But it just sort of irks me that you started with this character in Winter Soldier and Civil War who was keeping the Carter legacy going by being this awesome modern agent who fought for the side of good, but then they squandered that by having Sharon so upset that she was burned in Civil War that she turned to a life of crime. I mean, is she just evil now because she may have made out with her uncle? That would turn anyone to the dark side, I'd imagine. But seriously, I don't mind good characters turning evil. In fact, I think if done right, that's a cool idea. But the way this all happened off screen and we didn't see her grapple with the choice to be a bad guy now just doesn't feel right. I thought the ruined section should have some honorable mentions. These characters I think were ruined by the MCU but don't necessarily deserve an entire section devoted to them. So these are just my quick thoughts. Lightning round. Ready? Go. Crossbones was written off way too early. Malekith is a cool comic villain that got screwed over. The Collector deserves more screen time, and no, putting him in What If doesn't count even though he now has abs. And Iron Fist was a huge dumpster fire, and yes, that does still count as MCU, right? Okay, phew. Glad that's out of the system. Alright, I've been negative for quite a long time already with all the talk about ruined characters, and I don't want to come across like the MCU has been doing it on purpose. They're just trying to create the best narratives and stories with these characters. But you know, in a way that will also make them billions of dollars. So let's switch to some positivity and talk about some characters that the MCU has totally fixed after lackluster first outings. And of course, the first person I have to talk about for this is Thor. If I told you back in the middle of Phase 2 after Thor: The Dark World that between Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, and Thor, that Thor would be the one to not only get a fourth movie but become probably one of the most popular characters who can continue on for many movies to come, you would have thought I was crazier than Dr. Eric Selvig in Thor: The Dark World. It just didn't seem like that character was really clicking. I mean, sure, we all loved Loki to the point where even though he was a mass murderer in the Avengers, they brought him back to co-lead Thor 2. But the Thor character himself was kind of plain. He was too serious and created an easy target for Iron Man to insult, but that meant by himself he lacked a lot of interesting features. At least on the inside. On the outside, he has many interesting features. Anyways, the story behind Marvel's soft reboot of the Thor franchise is really interesting, but I think the bulk of it lies on the fact that Chris Hemsworth is really funny. He was still an unknown when he first played Thor, so although the character cracked jokes, he never was the funny one. But then Hemsworth started taking on more comedy projects like the Vacation reboot and the 2016 version of Ghostbusters, and it made people go, wow, this guy's actually hilarious. And that allowed them to be open to the idea of pushing Thor in a new direction. And paired with the hilariously quirky Taika Waititi, the duo delivered one of the best MCU movies in Thor Ragnarok. This new version of Thor, you could argue, is a little dimmer than before, but overall he's been able to retain that sense of tragedy that defines his character, while still being the funniest person in the room. This has been a great fix for a character who I now want to see in 10 more movies. Hawkeye started off as the butt of everyone's jokes. I mean, he's just a dude with a handful of arrows fighting alongside literal superheroes for Pete's sake. But there was a way to highlight Clint Barton's contributions to the Avengers that the franchise took a while to get right, and it all goes back to the mishandling of the character in the first Avengers film. For most of the movie, Clint is mind-controlled and really just acting as a way to give Natasha a personal stake in the narrative. It's established that Clint saved her and brought her over to the good side, so now she feels she needs to save him. And maybe Hawkeye being a bad guy for most of the movie is a callback to his comic origins of being a villain, but it hurt his character immensely, both in the eyes of fans and in the eyes of the actor playing Clint. Sure, we all bash on Hawkeye from time to time, but Jeremy Renner even wanted to be written out of the franchise after his disappointing experience on that first movie. Thankfully, they were able to course correct. Like, sure, at first it felt like they overcorrected too much by having Hawkeye basically be the main Avenger in Age of Ultron. I mean, they gave him the best quips, they gave him the most dramatic narrative beats, both with his secret farm family and the Quicksilver demise. They made him the one who gave the ultimate pep talk to Wanda, as well as having characters like Tony telling him that he was the heart of the team. I mean, that's a little too much. Future appearances really helped in making Hawkeye a vital member of the team and interesting enough to stand out. Maybe they realized that after the Wanda mentorship type of thing they had going, that Clint works best in a mentor role, and now we have the Hawkeye show, which has been mostly a delight. How do you think the MCU would look if Hawkeye was written out in Age of Ultron? Probably very different. And we would have missed out on his awful haircut in Endgame, which would have been the biggest travesty. This one might also be a little controversial, but I think it took some time for Steve Rogers to work in team films. His first solo movie was great, and Captain America: The Winter Soldier is top-tier MCU, but I wasn't a fan of Joss Whedon's take on the character in the first two Avengers movies. He was too much of a goody-two-shoes where it felt a bit like a caricature. For the character to go from the espionage thriller where he starts to doubt the government in The Winter Soldier to someone who yells out language in Age of Ultron in the middle of a mission just felt off. But it's no coincidence that once the Russo brothers took control of the entire MCU, that Cap improved. They like to paint him not as an old-school man out of time who comically doesn't understand things, but rather as someone who's lonely in the present day but still is adamant about doing what's right. Though we can also discuss some other time on whether his choice to go back to Peggy at the end of Endgame was in character or not. I'm gonna be honest with you, I was not very happy at first that Steve gave the shield to Sam instead of Bucky. Like, up to that point, Sam was an okay sidekick character, but Bucky had such a complicated history. I was a firm believer that Bucky getting the shield would be fantastic for his character arc, as he would go from US soldier to brainwashed Russian assassin, back to America's most famous symbol. I thought it would be the ultimate way to show that Bucky had moved past the Winter Soldier moniker. And heck, he was even a super soldier. Of course, that shield feels heavy, Sam. You're a fleshy human while Bucky and Steve have super strength. But having said that, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show did a great job in addressing concerns from fans like me on why Sam got the shield. It leaned into the doubt by having Sam also not think he was necessarily ready to pick up the shield, and we watched for 6 episodes as he grappled with both the legacy that came before, as well as calling Steve and Bucky out for not realizing the implications of a black man holding the shield. And sure, Sam may have gone from the guy who jokes with Steve after the former Cap gave a long inspirational speech, saying, "Did you write that down first or was it off the top of your head?" to becoming the guy who delivers like a 4-minute speech at the end of his own TV show, but that's just a tiny nitpick. After that show, I'm fully on board with a Captain America 4 with Sam Wilson as the new Captain America. Captain America: Civil War was just an excuse to get all of our characters to fight each other at the airport. Everything else around that scene is just basically window dressing. And that's why the Baron Zemo character felt a little lackluster. Like, sure, it was a good character in that movie for characters like Black Panther to bounce off of, and the performance was overall solid, but it felt like Zemo really could have been any random mercenary who wanted revenge against the Avengers. Like, I would argue that in that movie, it works better if it's not Baron Zemo, but rather some unknown character who was negatively impacted by the Avengers, but I digress. Anyways, it seemed like although the movie was good, the Zemo character was going to be written out and forgotten, but that's not what happened. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier show made the wise decision to not only bring Zemo back, but revamp and retool his character to make him slightly more in line with the comics.
You look exactly like the man you're supposed to be playing, aka the Smiling Tiger. He even has a bad nickname.
Like, was it a little fan servicey for them to have him don the purple mask for one scene for literally no reason? Maybe, but at least overall it put the character in a great position going forward. There's a lot of talk about a future Thunderbolts team, and you have to wonder if they'll follow the comics and make Zemo a vital part of the group. The Zemo we saw in Civil War? No way that guy would ever be part of a supervillain team. The Zemo we saw in Falcon and the Winter Soldier? I can absolutely see that. And who am I kidding? Zemo was fixed the moment we saw him dancing in Madripoor. Now, here's the big question that often divides people. Do you think the MCU has ruined the Peter Parker character by making him basically Iron Man Jr.? Or do you think that's what the character needed? I go back and forth with this issue and don't think I'll come to a conclusion until I see like 3 more Tom Holland-led films. Make it happen, MCU.